to the March 9th, 2009 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. And I'll call this meeting to order. First up, we have the City Council staff report. We have updates from Deborah A. Owens, City Clerk.
Thank you, Sioux Falls City Council, and good afternoon. Just a couple of things. I know that some of you know that Denise Tucker has been working with the Inside Town Hall programming, and I got to catch a couple of those recently, and I just want to say a thank you to Channel 16. They've done a phenomenal job of working with that project, and if you watch the one on the Drake Springs Pool, you'll notice that there's pictures of that and a great update with Don Kearney and Councilmember Anderson Jr., and there are others out there, but they've just really stepped it up, and I just wanted to say thank you to them. They've done a wonderful job. In addition, there was a memo that went out to the council over the weekend concerning how the budget was going to be adopted by the council this year, and some changes proposed by Rowan Horst, Director of Finance, and then also I was asked to review and kind of look at those and to do some other suggestions. So I think, and that was in the memo to you, all of those suggestions, but I think just to curb the discussion, I think that may be sent to Fiscal Committee at the request of some council members. I'm not sure, but unless there are questions, I'll just continue on. Otherwise, I think that is all I have. We continue to monitor stuff with the legislative session, as is the last week. Then we hope to have an update at the Breakfast Club from our lobbyist, Yvonne Taylor, and others who are the county and the school district as well. Might be a fun Breakfast Club meeting, so we're looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
Questions of Deborah? Seeing none. Number 3 is the mayor's office. Anybody here from the mayor's office? Apparently not. Number 4 is audit committee. Do we have a report from audit?
No report.
Fiscal committee. Report from fiscal?
No report.
Thank you, Pat. Land use committee.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Public services.
I'll be filling in for Kenny, who's gone today, but we'll be meeting immediately after this meeting at 5 o'clock, and Code of Ethics Ordinance revisions will be the discussion, also code enforcement.
Questions of Vernon? Very good. Seeing none. Next item will be a city council open discussion. Are there items for open discussion today? Councilor Costello.
Well, piggybacking a little bit of what Deborah was talking about as far as the budget presentations, and apparently if that's going to go back to the fiscal committee, and that's fine with me, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't get some input from the rest of the council who aren't on the fiscal committee about their preference for the presentations. Gene has obviously indicated a willingness to provide us with the budget address or the budget information consecutively with the CIP and the operating together. I think the 3 of us on the fiscal committee thought that was a good idea. Looking for some feedback from those that didn't have that opportunity to be in that discussion.
Councilor Knudsen.
Well, actually, I am, because I have more flexibility with my time than possibly other city councilors, is that I am fairly flexible on this topic, and do think that actually the actual, budget hearings and the CIP hearings are very detailed and very helpful, and if we have to miss one, we are always able to watch it on our computer and so forth. And so to me, the main information is presented during that time. So as far as the actual adoption, I know that sometimes we have lots and lots of amendments, and I say this very, very respectfully, but I mean, many of them are not even seconded. So I mean, when push gets to shove, we as a city council, even though we could make major changes to the CIP plan and the budget, we actually don't. In reality, we make very, very, very minor changes. I mean, and so I'm just saying, I'm not, I'm fine with doing both on the same night also. Do I understand you correctly?
No, maybe I didn't make myself clear enough. I was talking about more about the when the directors present their budgets to us. The format this year was going to be having the CIP and the operating budget presented at the same time. So Parks would give both of their presentations in essence at the same time, or police, and same with fire and that. And want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that change. And then also the other input that I was hoping to get was as far as timing. Do we want to do Gene has proposed, I think, doing them over 3 or 4 days in 1 week, or do we want to spread them out over a couple different weeks, and just trying to get feedback on that?
Councilor Knudsen.
Excuse me, Councilor Costello, because I saw that memo, and obviously I didn't read it clearly enough to be confused at all, is that I'll just say once again, I would defer to the rest of you on that, because I don't have a personal preference on that. You know, I think in a way sometimes it's good just to have a good chunk, but I do think after about 2.5 to 3 hours at the most, I'm pretty saturated with information. So I'll see what the rest of you prefer with your work schedules.
Councilor Staggers.
Well, I was going to say that I hope that we don't diminish the amount of information that's given to us. I mean, when we're talking about a budget, you know, this year of about $412 million, I don't think we can get too little information. So the more that we can get, the better.
Councilor Jameson.
I'll just make a comment that I like the new packaging. I like the idea of presenting them both at the same time. So I guess that's any addition to the comments here. I think it's a good idea.
I'd just like to say that I understand the relationship between the two, and there are some, I wouldn't call them overlapping, but related areas between the operational and the CIP. However, sometimes I feel like Dee does, that there's a whole lot of information there. I'm capable of making that leap back in my memory to the operational as it ties into CIP a week later. I just think that, or even late, or even longer, as it has been sometimes in the past. I just think it's an enormous amount of information. I don't want to become tired or weary when I'm studying this stuff down here. You know, too long of a day. After having a long day and then coming down here and going over budget issues, I almost think we should do it first thing in the morning, because I'm good till noon. But you know, that's kind of how I feel about it. Is I do like the format that we had before. I do understand the reasoning behind the new one. But you know, if you don't do numbers every day, like some folks do and are experts at it, I'm certainly not. You know, it behooves me a little bit to take my time and go through it slower. Mr. Bennigan.
Well, I would agree with some of the comments. I frankly, in my time around, it's always been the conversations after we get done with the budget process that we've all said that if we were to improve the process, the one thing that we would do would be to do the CIP and the general operating budget at the same time. As far as spreading that information out, one of the proposals that I got in my mail 15 minutes ago, I guess, is the issue of doing it on Mondays, on 3 consecutive Mondays in a row. I think there's some merit to that versus having 3 consecutive days in a row. So if we wanted to change it so we're spreading out the brain drain, if you will, I don't have a problem with doing that. But I also feel pretty strongly that I would like to continue to get all the information that we request. We've always been able to do that. And if we want to change that format, we can change the format on how it's presented or how much more information or how much time we have to ask questions. But the issue is I think the CIP and the budget ought to be put together, and those conversations ought to be handled by each department as we go. And then if we want to do a 3-week Monday session, 3 consecutive Mondays, and then when we're ready to do the adoption of the budget, I think that ought to be the only thing on the agenda that evening, rather than combining it with other businesses and get it all done at one time.
Mr. Costello.
Gerald, for your benefit, the discussion was to send some of the this whole proposal back to the fiscal committee, and I guess we were just trying to get some input from the non-fiscal committee members prior to that. But Gene, since you're here, could you maybe step up for a couple questions?
Gene Rowenhorst, Director of Finance.
Just on the first blush, and I'm sure we wouldn't hold you to it forever, but if we were to take our, starting in August, our Mondays, say, starting at 3 o'clock and going to 6 o'clock and doing that for 3 consecutive Mondays and then maybe pick up a Wednesday after that, would that meet your schedule with the Finance Department?
We're okay with basically anything that you want to do, so we thought we're kind of mystified with what all the fuss is about right now. But
And there won't be any more or any less information that has been given to us in previous years?
No.
Then as far as the proposed resolutions for the CIP and for the operating budget and the eventual ordinance. In the past, we've always adopted the ordinance in October. And why?
The appropriation, yes.
Right, the appropriation. Why are we moving that up? I forgot what the logic was.
The logic is to have the CIP resolution, the budget resolution, and the budget appropriation all done at the same time and moving simultaneously together, rather than having them scattered out over several days.
Because in the past, we've done the CIP in August, the resolution for the CIP in August, and
Yep.
the resolution for the operating in September, and then done the appropriation ordinance in October.
Yes.
And when does the ordinance for the appropriation have to be done by?
By October 31st. I think it's in October. I'm not sure it's the 31st.
I think you're right. I think it's the end. It has to be adopted by the end of October, which would be, we'd have to have acted on it by our third meeting in October. But that's almost 3 or 4 weeks ahead. I mean, your proposed agenda is about 3 or 4 weeks ahead of when it has to be finalized. Was there a reason we were trying to do that?
Purely out of expediency on the part of the council. If you run them all together, just right, and there's really no reason not to that we see. Having them move all together just seems to be more efficient. But
And Gerald, you just said that you think we should dedicate one Monday night to, is it just the adoption of the appropriations ordinance, or did you think we should do both the resolutions and the ordinance at the same time?
I'm flexible on that. I don't see that the appropriations is a big issue. After you've gone through and done all the due diligence, if you will, all you have left is the addendums or amendments that might be made, or they're either passed or they're not passed. And then the other issue is that the appropriations is a formal adoption of the budget with the amendments, so it's not like it's a significant time issue.
So did you say that you wanted one Monday night for the two resolutions?
That would be my preference, but obviously I'm interested in anybody else's input.
Councilor Brown.
Gene, isn't there an issue with the appropriation and the property tax levy? We don't have that until October.
You never have the right number in October anyhow. That number does get changed based on what comes through from the county.
When is the correct number?
I can't answer that for you off the top of my head.
If I could, I had spent some time with Department of Revenue, Colleen, and then also with Kyle down at the county. I think that certified number is delivered to the county by the first week in October, so sometime. And last year, if I may, the council adopted the appropriation ordinance that first Monday in October, but we needed to amend to put the levy number in there so that we had the certified number from the state. So you get it by around that first week in October or shortly thereafter is what I was told.
So then we get it from the county, who gets it from the state, is that correct?
Yes.
Councilor Staggers.
This is completely off track, but are we on a 5-second delay on this broadcast? Because
Yeah.
what we're saying does not correspond to what's being,
If I may, Councilmember Litz, yes, this is actually web streamed, but it shoots down to San Francisco and then back to us. So there is a short delay in that, in the broadcast, if you will, not on Channel 16, I think, which is live, but on the web stream. Or wait, this would be.
We're having a delay here on 16.
Okay. Then there is a slight delay with the software. It actually, the video is being recorded, if you will, in San Francisco and then shot back.
But this is the first time I've noticed this. Is this just,
I've noticed it's a little later the last two times. Usually it's just a few seconds, like 3 or 4 seconds. So I can check into that and see why it's longer than it is normally.
I think we're not watching the live like we usually do. We're watching the feedback as everybody else would
It's
see.
slower.
Councilor Costello.
Well, I'm going to go on a limb here and make a proposal, and maybe we can eliminate the whole fiscal thing. But why don't we, if everybody's okay with this, why don't we go plan on starting August 3rd, for 3 consecutive Mondays from 3 to 6 to go through the budget presentations. And then if we need to, we can have, because I think you had 4 days planned there too, right?
Yeah, I think it was a total of 9.5 hours.
Yeah, and if we do a 3 to 6, that's, 9 hours, and, if we plan on the 3rd, the 10th, and the 17th from 3 to 6, and then we can always come back and pick up maybe on a Wednesday afternoon if we're not getting through. We plan on that, and then as far as the resolutions go, I would be supportive of the idea of doing both resolutions. Seems like our second Monday in the month is typically a little lighter activity, so if we were to do the CIP and the operating resolution on the 14th of September. But then I would propose maybe waiting until October for the appropriation ordinance, which doesn't seem like that's a... And when's that number?
Pardon me, you usually get that number in the first week of October, so most of the time since '94, the council's adopted the appropriation ordinance that second week in October, with last year the caveat being you did it 1 week prior. You adopted it the first week of October.
So we could have first reading on either the 5th or the 12th, and then just amend it on the second reading on the 12th or the 19th.
If you don't have the number, you could amend it. If you do, you wouldn't need to.
Mr. Brown.
The only thought I would have on that, doing the appropriation in October, is I would hesitate that we continue, like we did last time for the first time ever in history, reopen the discussion in the budget in the appropriation process, because I don't think that's appropriate. That would be, and we could set a rule on ourselves maybe to solve that, but I don't think it's appropriate that we rehash ground that we've already adopted.
I'm not sure, but I think any counselor on the ordinance can open it up anyways. I don't think we can prevent anybody from doing that, can we?
Councilor Staggers?
Yeah, I was going to say that, last year when we did that was the first time since I've been on the council it was reopened. But the rest of the council members, by majority vote, agreed to make the changes too. So I think it's more than appropriate.
Because it's a standard ordinance, and I would think we wouldn't be able not to have discussion on an ordinance. I don't know. I'm looking for guidance from somebody.
That's part of the reason we were putting them all together, so that if you touch one, you can touch the other at the same time, and then you're done with it.
Ms. Owen?
If I may, I think that is really unusual. I think that Gene and I spoke about that earlier. That was the first time since our home rule charter came into effect in 1994, so it's a pretty rare occurrence that the council would amend the appropriation ordinance. And so, and clearly, of course, at the council, when an item comes before you, you have the ability to amend anything, but I don't think that would be the custom. My sense is that wouldn't be the custom.
The custom at the state level, though, is they run it all through at one time, do they not?
They do. That's a different process where they're sort of full-time until they're not. So they'll actually go through and make significant changes. And then they roll through from the appropriations committee. We don't have an appropriations committee. And then don't open the budget. They'll run it through from out of committee straight through. But you have input during committee where you can make formal changes there.
Councilor Knudsen?
What is the downside of just wrapping it all up and being done with it? And not carrying it over into October? What's the downside of that? What am I missing? I don't even remember what I'm missing on this. I'm kind of confused on all of it,
Well,
actually.
to me, Dee, it's just information overload and wearing me out personally, with all the numbers and having to think of the various scenarios. I mean, it's like I say, I'm not a professional accountant or a numbers guy, and the old adage of the top will absorb as much as the bottom can stand applies to me, because after about 3 or 4 hours of this stuff, I'm toning out.
Okay, and I totally agree with you on that. I don't think I made myself very clear. Sorry. Is that once we're done with amendments, on either one, the CIP or once we're done with amendments for the CIP or the operating budget, once we voted on those and then we're done, why not just? What is the downside of not just being doing the appropriate and being done with it? I don't remember what I'm forgetting.
Ms. Owen?
You don't have the tax levy. You don't have that certified number from the state in September. It's not available.
And does that matter? Does that matter as far as our adoption, though? Because, does that matter?
Yes. It does in the sense that that's what we put in there to determine some revenues regarding, and it's in charter, so it's significant that we have to have it in the ordinance.
Okay, I just don't remember that levy discussion in the past. I think I'm not remembering very well.
Councilor Benega?
I understand where you're coming from, Bob, but I guess the issue is if we have the budget hearings on 4 different evenings, which all of them lasting from 3 to 6 or 6:30 or 7, those are 3 different individual dates.
Consecutive days.
No, we were looking at 3 consecutive Mondays, I believe.
That's okay. That's.
I think that's the one that we are talking about, correct? And then if we look at the other adoption of both the CIP and the general operating at one time with nothing else on the agenda, no other city business, I don't think we'd be here for more than 3 or 4 hours.
And like I say, that scenario is the one I like. The first one that we had where they were all in a row, all in 1 week, I was a little averse to that.
So I guess the discussion really is about whether or not we do the appropriation ordinance that same night on the 14th, or we wait and do it in October when the tax levy comes in. And Deborah believes that the tax levy needs to be there. Gene, obviously, I'm getting the impression that you do not think it needs to be there.
Well, we'd have an estimated number that would be in there, and that seems to be sufficient, but I'm not...
Councilor Brown?
Well, I too like the idea of the consecutive Mondays. Maybe we go ahead with that and do a little research on whether the appropriations can happen in September or not happen, and get the city attorney's office involved to make sure.
Gail, is that something you can handle?
Of course she can handle.
Well, very good. Then is this conversation stalemated then until Gail comes back with that information? Okay, very good. Any other items for open discussion on City Council? Councilor Knudsen?
Well, right before I came to work today, I had a call from a person who lives up in the Norton Froelich area, and he was just concerned about the property that I think it's called OTR, that huge tractor business, or tire business, excuse me, those really large tires. And he said that there's not been much activity there at all since March 1st, and the rumor is in that neighborhood is that the business is closing. And he was curious from a city perspective, what would then happen to all those tires. And so anyway, I just mentioned it to Director Cooper when I walked in the door, and the only reason I mentioned it, it was just still on my mind after just finishing the conversation. And I said to him, well, maybe another business will come in and buy it or whatever, but I guess it's locally owned. And anyway, but he just reminded me that some of the neighbors were not at all excited about having all those acres and acres and acres of huge tires anyway, and so now they're a little bit worried that the business is closing or going out of business, and all those tires are going to be left there. So I'm just sharing that.
Thank you for that. Questions of Dee on that? Councilor Jameson?
Dee, that's out on North Cliff somewhere?
Yeah.
Do you know where?
Yeah, I mean, I could see it in my mind because it's not very far from a home I visit often to do volunteer work, but it's you can't miss it. It's way up on North Cliff.
If you go 38th Street North, you'd be able to see them after you get up on top of the hill.
Yeah, and it's like just a huge business. And I think it opened while I was on the city council, shortly after I went on city council. And I think it started there about in 2004, if I recall correctly. But they're huge tires, and this man alleges that the process that was used to try to fix all these tires wasn't a successful fix. But again, this is all his opinion. I don't know what's going on there.
I had just one other item to try to bring up, just to try to float this out here with you guys. I think everybody's probably has somebody in their family or relative or friend who's been affected by the economy in its current state. And I've just been doing some thinking, wondering what it is that we could do as a council to try to mend this problem and be a part of the fix. And I had one idea that was presented to me was possibly if the city or if we offered preference points to a contractor who was bidding on a project, let's say the city was offering, because they're a state South Dakota company, they get 5 points, preference points. I guess the worst case would be is if we lost a bid like that, like Phillips Avenue, to a company from Illinois or Minnesota by $100 or $500 or $1. What can we do to help keep business here, to help keep people working here? What can we do as a council to promote that? You know, and I know I don't want to hire a bunch of people. I don't want to create a bunch of government jobs to employ people, but maybe there's something we can take off of the books. Maybe it's a zoning restriction that would help promote builders. Maybe it's this bidding preference point project. There might be problems with that. I've had some conversations with the city staff. But what is there that we could do on our half to help kind of bring this economy back around as a group? We can write laws. We can take laws off the book. It's up to us. And so I was just wondering if we wanted to have a, I don't know if you call it a city summit or a town hall meeting or something, but we invite anybody who has an idea to come share it with us. We could all have ideas ourselves. Kermit could certainly bring some history people, some economists from the school maybe. Dee's got all kinds of volunteer people. You know, Gerald's got all kinds of people in his office with experience from years around. You know, I think all of us have something we could maybe bring. And if we all came together and just threw out some ideas, we might get something out of it. I try to tell my wife that I'm the smartest one in the group here. She's not buying it. And I think if we all came together and invited staff, city staff, I'm just kind of reaching out here as trying to find a way to help be a part of the solution. I think the economy generally will work itself out and be just fine. But I think as long as we're sitting here, we just as well maybe take a look. If there's something we can do, let's do it. Any ideas or thoughts?
Councilor Knudsen.
Well, Councilor Jameson, I think that the thought of you know, the local preference as far as bidding is an interesting one, and it's one that I've heard discussions about here and there, even when times were very, very, very good. And I would be very supportive of us pulling out our ordinances on bidding process. Again, you know, from a legal standpoint, I don't know what all's involved as far as discriminatory practices or whatever there and problems for us. But I believe that some communities do have a policy where they prefer a local business if it's competitive. So, I mean, I think that we could pull out our ordinance. It's on the books in that particular area. And if we wanted to go past that as far as summit or whatever, I don't care. But I've heard that discussion when times are very, very good, and we just haven't really pulled it out and looked at it.
Questions of Dee on that? Anybody else with a thought? Oh, Councilor Brown.
I think it's always worth exploring, and you know, maybe we start with the department heads. Since they work with it all the time, they might have some ideas that might trigger other citizens' ideas as well. So maybe we could reserve time during an upcoming informational for the department head team to offer suggestions and use that time also for citizens to weigh in, and that might be worth exploring.
You know, from my perspective, Dee, I think you're right. There may be some state law implication to doing the bidding things that I'm not really aware of. I'm not a contracts lawyer, but it seems to me there is some substance in there that we'd have to be aware of. One other thing that does come to my mind would be something preventing. As we all know, the housing industry has taken quite a beating, you know, nationwide and in this city really lately, and you know. We sit down here, and I do it too, but we add costs onto housing all the time. And there is one thing coming up, and that would be the residential fire sprinkler system that has been proposed by the the firefighters on a nationwide basis. They want to put mandate sprinklers in all new houses. And if we could stop that from being done, I think that's a step in the right direction for the future. You know, there's varied ideas on how much all that might cost and the efficiency of it, but one thing's for certain, it's going to be expensive. Mr. Staggers.
Yeah, Bob, I agree with what you're saying about the fire sprinklers in homes. Usually what happens is we spend a lot of time, there's an ordinance drawn up, and then we go through the committee process and talk about it and so forth. But I wish sometimes we'd be a little more proactive when we come to some of these ordinances, which, like you're saying, I think would definitely harm the city of Sioux Falls. I don't know, just a thought, is there anything that we can do right, proactively, just saying, hey, we don't want this kind of ordinance here in Sioux Falls, raising the cost of housing and hurting people, instead of, having to go through all this process?
Well, I guess I really don't know the answer to that yet, whether we would approach something like that through the state first and then locally, much like we did the adoption of the building ordinances. Because we're going to be doing that again, and I think in 2011 is the next time that we'll adopt those. And that comes doesn't come under the fire code like you'd think it was. The sprinklers actually come under the building code, which is a little bit upside down to me. But I think it's being explored, but I just wanted to bring it to our attention for when that matter did come on the floor here. Councilor Knudsen.
I realize, Councilor Litz, that this is just a general discussion, but I mean that example, though, that you just mentioned, and I know we're getting lobbied a little bit on that topic, but I mean, I still think safety matters, too. I guess I think sure, it'd be cheaper for landlords to not, when they renovate apartments, to not have to put in sprinkler systems, but isn't there a safety factor? If sprinkler systems aren't safe, if there's no need to put them in for rented places, I guess I wonder if they should have to go in anywhere. I'm just saying, I don't, some of those ideas, I don't know. I think safety matters, too.
I would agree with you. I think safety matters when you're dealing with the public or for somebody that's forced to live in a house, like an apartment or something along those lines. But as far as you building a house, if you're building a brand-new house, I think you should be allowed the discretion of whether you want to put those sprinklers in or not. Here's some other things that if we start getting down south there or up north, you get into the rural communities, you might not have the water to do that with, and you may be also might be part of the prescription to have a heated outdoor elevated storage tank, so you will have the water pressure to put these to make those sprinklers operate. My thoughts are is most of the fires that and since I come on to city council, I watch a lot of the fire department's business, and whenever I see a fire, I've been going over there. And every building that I have seen go up in flames in this town since I've been on the council has been an old one. If you want to retro the old ones, I just think there's some inequities here, and I think that people are losing their ability to choose on this matter, and that's what troubles me. Councilor Costello.
Regarding the sprinkling, I kind of was under the impression we were not going down that road as a city, but I see that Director Cooper is in the audience there. I was wondering if you'd share a few comments on that.
Good afternoon, Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Yes, there was a national conference held to consider additional amendments to building codes. The national conference took the position that the sprinkler systems in single-family homes should be required through this next amendment process. We still have the option locally to make amendments, and based on our discussions with the local home builders, there is not interest at this time to pursue that. So at least based on what I have been told by the mayor and others, that we're not going to pursue that option at this time.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Mike. Any other thoughts on Councilor Benega?
This is a different topic if we're done with that one. A couple of, it's been longer than that, a month or so ago, I testified in front of the Charter Revision Committee about a couple of things that I have an interest or concern about. And next week, I think they're having another meeting here at the Carnegie, and I'd like, for those of you who either agree or disagree with me, to maybe have the opportunity to go to talk to that group, because I did get some mileage out of both of them. One of them is the whole issue of the number of signatures people need for petitions to run in a district versus citywide, and how that compares to the school district and everybody else. I think that's an issue that needs to be discussed. Right now, it's the same across the board. It's 200 signatures for any district or citywide position. I think even for the mayor is the same, and the school board's like 25 or something like that. So there's an inequity there. The other thing that I have a little bit of concern about, and this might be unusual, but I'm to come up with a better term, I think we need to figure out something to stagger the terms of our responsibilities a little differently than what they are now. In 2010, we're going to have potentially 5 people out of the 8 or 9 that could be replaced or reelected or whatever. I think that's too many. That's a higher proportion of people in the election process that should be replaced or whatever in the future. And consensus is amongst myself and people I've talked to in the past, I don't think I'm the slowest guy on the, might be close, on the council, but the issue is it takes a year or sometimes 2 years to get into the flow of the experience and having the whole responsibility of what we're required to do. And then to have 5 out of the 9 people in 2010 potentially replaced, I think is too big of a turnover, frankly. And I've expressed that to the Charter Revision Committee and did get some mileage, I think, out of that also. So next week when they have the next Charter Revision Committee, I'd suggest that if you have an opinion on that, that you have the opportunity to express that, because they are considering that. And they also are considering the petition drive, if you will, and the number of signatures.
Ms. Owen.
I was just going to let you all know this is partly during your Board of Equalization hearing, so that may, I think there's a conflict of schedule, which is unfortunate, but they'll continue to meet. I can give you some, we did talk about the idea of having, you know, every 2 years 4 council members are up for re-election. And the commission did look at how those were replaced over time. They actually had a table from Sean Turneau who looked at that, and this is more of a fluke more recently. Usually there's carryover, but we had a council member who stepped out and didn't go full term, and so, or 2 actually, and so that's why there's something unusual. But over time, when they looked at that, they did see that there was only 2 new members usually on as far as the council goes on that, although they did look at 12-year terms and extending it from 8 years to 12 years, creating more of a staggered effect over time as long as everybody runs full term. Just so you know, that was part of the dynamic that I listened to.
Councilor Benningham.
That dynamic might be right, but it's not. It's more theory than practice. And the other issue is that table and that chart that was put together is not accurate. We went through that in some detail also, and there's some errors in that assumptions that were made. So I think if you want the opportunity to look at that, I think it's important at least to bring that up to their attention, because as we know, it's not going to be an immediate change. It's going to take time for that to happen, and it's got to be voted on and all those good things. So I think it's important that if you have that opinion that 5 out of 9 is too many, that we need to express that and come up with a solution that would avoid that, whether it's a fluke or whether it's an issue of people not fulfilling their terms. There's got to be a better method than what we've accomplished so far.
Any other comments? Councilor Jameson.
You know, as I stated before, I was kind of floating that balloon out there, and it kind of got drifted away, and that's fine. But if I could check with maybe Deb, City Clerk's office, to see if this Saturday from 9 to noon, we could do a coffee with the council, and I would sure host that, and have anybody else who can make it show up. And let's just label it a public-private partnership meeting. Anybody with an idea of how we can have a public-private partnership to help stimulate the economy show up, I guess. Thanks.
Anything else on that topic? Anything else for City Council open discussion? Seeing nothing, number 9 is presentations. So the first one that we're going to have is an internal audit report on disbursements by Rich Oksel.
Thank you, City Council. You should have 2 audit reports at your desk there. First one we'll look at is the disbursements. And this is an audit that was approved as part of our annual audit program for the year. We are planning to do this every year, just take a sample of disbursements and make sure that they're all proper and following all the rules and procedures and policies. And for this one, we kind of broke down our sample. We looked at 4 different areas. We make, the City of Sioux Falls anyway, makes thousands of disbursements every month, whether it's a payroll payment, pension payments, what we call general disbursements or miscellaneous. So when we selected our sample, we kind of broke it down in those 4 areas, and we sampled disbursements in each of those. And overall, we found that disbursements were authorized and proper purposes, in compliance with laws, rules, policies, and procedures, supported by proper documentation, and properly recorded within the city's financial records. And we do have some detail in that report, and if you have any questions for me, I'd be very happy to take those at this time. Hearing none, we'll move on to the second audit report, which is donated money. This might be a little more interest to our audience and our council members. I've been with the city for a long, long time, and I was aware that we do receive donations from the public. But what I didn't know is how much that we do indeed receive. We receive quite a bit of money every year, and the bulk of it is going to the park department and the library. And what might happen is somebody passes away, and in their will they had designated a certain amount of their estate to go to, say, the library. So the library director might get or somebody in the library board might get a letter from an attorney's office with a check saying this is given to the library on behalf of so-and-so's estate. The park department also receives donations from the public. Sometimes it's for a very specific purpose. And there's a formal agreement signed with that party to ensure that what they want the money to be used for is how the park understands that. Sometimes it's very informal. A person or a group is using the community center. There's no charge for that, but they just appreciate it so much that maybe they leave $20 with the staff person at the community center. Just sort of a donation to the park department. There's no strings attached or nothing like that. We did look at, focused our audit on the library and the park and rec, and we've also focused on January through October of 2008. And we found that in general, there's some controls over this process. We found that the library seems to have a little better process. It's a little more formalized. Our recommendation is on page 2 there, down at the bottom there. We recommend that the park department come up with a more written policy to address these donations, and also on page 3 that they come up with some sort of form, so when the employee receives the money from somebody that they have a form that documents where and when the money was received, who gave it, the amount, what they wanted it spent for. That was sort of the missing picture in this, that we wanted some more formal documentation of that process. The management response is indicated there at the bottom of page 2 in the bold type, and on page 3 in the bold type. And we do have the Park and Recreation Director here today if you have a question about that, or the Finance Director. The response from management is that there will be a citywide policy to address this, so that any money that comes into any city department will have some sort of citywide policy, and we'll have as part of that policy, we'll have a form that the employee should fill out when they receive the money, so that we have that documentation at the moment of who gave it, what it was for, et cetera. Like I said, we do appreciate that from the public. We also found out that normally it's not solicited. It's somebody or a family that decides to give money to the city. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to take those at this time.
Councilor Brown.
Thanks, Rich. Do you have any sense of how much money we're talking about in terms of donations annually?
A total amount, that can vary from year to year. Some of these gifts can be in the 6 figures. You might get one, say, for the park department. That's a considerable sum of money.
Well, we've had some recently.
Don Kearney might have a better idea of that. A lot of them are very small, but I can't give you a dollar figure. Okay. The ones we looked at, we looked at for January through October, and it was just a couple of departments. But it gets into some large gifts from time to time.
The trailhead probably being the most recent one done.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Councilor Knudsen.
Rich, this probably doesn't really fall within the audit part. I was just wondering from what you know about how other cities handle this area, do you think there's anything more that our city should do to just kind of encourage the public to think about leaving, the library or the parks or any other departments in their will? I mean, should we be even more aggressive, encouraging folks to remember us, or would that be inappropriate?
I've asked other auditors in other cities. Usually, I just ask what their procedure is, but I didn't ask them what they do to encourage donations. But that's a thought. I don't know how to accomplish that.
Councilor Jameson.
Rich, did you find any donations that were just generally given to the city in general terms, no specific?
No, I didn't. We didn't find any of those. Usually, it's usually to the library or the park, typically, but not always. I know in the past we've say the fire department will get money. They'll say present a safety lecture to a group, and in appreciation they'll get a donation. Usually very small amounts.
The parks seems to get probably the majority of donations. Is that
I would say library and park both get
equally?
Yeah. They get quite a bit of money.
That's
from a lot of different people.
That's a pretty good story.
Yeah.
I mean, that people would give their money to.
Yeah, you'd be surprised that the city of Sioux Falls gets a lot of gifts from people. Yeah.
Public Works on the streets, never?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I'm sure it's happened at some point, but not to my knowledge.
Must have something to do with Mark.
Other questions of Rich? Councilor Knudsen.
Not a question, but I mean, again, sometimes we just do receive, besides money, I mean, we really receive some nice parcels of land. And
yes, we do.
So sometimes streets get built on those pieces of land.
And then to compound matters, what I thought of when you said the land thing was, we've got recently, Bob and Carrie Hall gave the museum some acreages of land up there, and with the idea of selling off some of that land. So there you've got the land donation that turns into cash to put back into the thing, which, would compound your suggestion. I don't want to create a lot of extra work, because I have confidence that our city is going to continue to handle these donations in a very respectable manner. And I'm content that they have, and your report seems to indicate that. But
yes. I think what we found is the staff takes this very, very seriously, and they make every effort they can to use the money as it was intended, if there was an intent expressed.
Any other questions of Rich? Well, Rich, I see you're up for part 2 here. The next thing that you would have would be the internal audit report on donated money.
That was it. That was
the money. Okay.
Yeah, that was it.
Well, okay, I guess, these disbursements are in here then, Rich?
Yes.
Okay. Did I have it upside down, or did you do that while I was gone?
No, I did that when you were gone.
Okay.
That's why it explains the confusion there. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Rich. The other item D here, item C is done, was my understanding. Is that correct, Gerald? Is there anything you care to add to that?
You were here for that one.
I was here, but I didn't know. You might have changed your mind during the week. So. Okay, the other one would be D, city employee pay raises. Today we have Bill O'Toole, the Director of Human Resources. Bill, thanks for being here today.
Good afternoon. Bill O'Toole, Director of Human Resources. I think the council is aware that the reason for my presence here today is from a discussion last week. Councilor Brown had some questions and asked that we be here today. And he had some questions that he forwarded to me, and what I've tried to do is create a presentation that might answer some of those questions, and be happy to answer any questions in just a moment. And each of you has a copy of the handout. And just real quickly, an overview of what I'm going to cover. We'll talk a little bit about the 2008 employees per 10,000 population comparison. You've seen this statistic before. I'll talk about the 2009 wages and benefit costs to the general fund, the cost to provide steps and cost of living adjustments annually, briefly about historical pay increases. I want to share a little bit some executive comments from the last consultant that the city hired back in 2000 called the Hay Group, and we'll review the current labor contract schedules and when they expire and the number of employees covered by those groups, and then just a real brief overview on the contingency planning and the staffing plan. And I think I can get through this in about 5 to 10 minutes and answer your questions. The first graph, again, you've seen this before. This is based on 2008 statistics. It shows you several jurisdictions on a per 10,000 population, how many city employees are represented. And you can see the city of Sioux Falls is at 73, and out of those shown on this chart, we're the second lowest in terms of number of city employees per 10,000 population. I just thought that would be good background information. In 2009, the wages and benefits in the general fund budget is a little over $77 million, or 65.2% of the total general fund budget, which is a little over $118 million. 50% of those dollars for wages and benefits is designated to public safety for police and fire. And I know everybody here in this room understands that city employees are the ones that are responsible for carrying out the programs and services to our citizens, but I thought it would be a good reminder to let those watching on Channel 16 and here in this room just to remind them of that fact. The next slide addresses the step increases and cost of living adjustments, and what you'll see here are some estimated numbers going forward into 2010. And a 3% COLA, for example, going forward into next year would cost about $1.8 million, or on a percentage basis, for every 1%, it's about $600,000. And of course, the other component to increases is step increases. I think everybody in this room is familiar with it. The city uses a 9-step pay program for its employees, with the exception of the appointed officials. And the value of those step increases for approximately 46% it would be about $1.2 million. So our estimate of COLA and step increases, if this were to in fact play out, I'm not saying that it is, and we're not proposing that, I'm just trying to give you an idea of cost, it would be about $3 million. The next slide talks a little bit about historical pay increases. And I think anybody who's been with the city long enough knows that our general cost of living increase from year to year is about 3%. And the data that I looked at confirmed that for the most part. And again, the step value is a different principle. So in addition to a COLA, the step value range is anywhere from about 3 to 5%. And that there's a variation. We have about 58 different pay grades in the city of Sioux Falls, and there is a variation of about 3 to 5% depending on where you fall in the step grades. So again, the total annual increase could be anywhere in the range of 3 to 8% for the majority of the employees. And the next few bullets talk about increases as it relates to appointed officials. It says that they have the largest potential increase, but for the most part, it's only 1% more than the rest of the city employees. And the reason for that is that the appointed officials do not have a step pay plan. They have a pay for performance program, and the range for their merit-based pay is anywhere from 0 to 6%. However, I did like to note that 6% is infrequent. The next couple of slides deals with some comments as it relates to the Hay Group from back in 2000. And basically, I just want to highlight a couple of the executive summary comments that they provided for us back in 2000 as it relates to how we were administering our pay plans here at the City of Sioux Falls. And one of the comments that they made is that at the time we did this study, obviously it showed that we had some shortfalls in police and fire, but for the most part, the largest employee groups ranges have been kept very close to the median, which is our philosophy over a 10-year period, and that was a real accomplishment. One of the other comments they made is that there was some compression between supervisors and subordinates that was about normal for public employers. And I'd like to emphasize that they also mentioned that grade spacing is comparable to well-administered private sector plans, meaning that range as you move on down or up is appropriate. A couple other quick comments. Again, going back to the concept of is there a question?
Bill, if I might, could you explain that a little bit more in the compression between the supervisors and subordinates?
In other words, is there enough of a gap between a supervisor and a subordinate to encourage people to promote through the range. And again, getting back to the 9-step program, there was a question about that, and I just wanted to mention that back in 2000, Hay had mentioned that one of the things the city could consider is using an annual step progression. I think as this council knows, for the first 5 steps, it's based on time and grade and your performance. And it's an annual increase in steps 1 through 5, and for steps 5 through 9, it's a 24-month waiting period. And what they were suggesting here is that one of the things the city could do is look at annual step progression in light of the ranges, but they did note that our current practice was not unreasonable, and we don't advocate changing that. And lastly, they said that the overall that the city had done a fine job of maintaining a solid pay program and should continue its current practice for the next 10 years, and I think that's just exactly what we've done. The next slide illustrates for you the current labor contract schedules and the identified COLAs, if applicable, and the number of employees that are covered under that labor contract. And you can see for our AFSCME group, which is our largest union at the City of Sioux Falls, covering 483 employees, their contract is up at the end of this year. So we'll be negotiating that labor contract later this year. The Fraternal Order of Police covers about 207 employees, and their 2010 cost of living increase is at 3%. As the council knows, we just finished IAFF last year, where we adopted a 3-year agreement with a COLA increase of 3%, and that covers about 173 of our employees. And on a percentage basis, about 80% of our city employees are covered under one of these 3 labor agreements. The next slide, and this should look real familiar to you, this has to do with our contingency planning. And if I just to do a very brief review, because you've seen this before, and this is administration's tool for dealing with that slower growth economy concept. And the first line of defense, if you'll remember, is reduction in expenditures. And the city has already identified 4.5% in estimated expenditure savings, or about $5.3 million. And of that $5.3 million, 2.4, or about 50% of it, is coming through normal personnel savings. The other is coming through departmental holdbacks that have been identified by each department, and about $5 million in fuel savings. And for the planning process right now, there's been a lot of effort, obviously, in this regard. That's where we're focusing a lot of our attention. However, we are coming up on the second line of defense, and that is in the area of modifying budget growth, either through the staffing plan, the capital plan, and obviously budgets moving forward. And with 2010 budgeting already starting, I think you'll see more information flowing through as it relates to modifying that budget growth for that second line of defense. And the third line of defense is the unreserved fund balance. If I could just, again, real quickly recap kind of the staffing plan. I think everybody here is familiar with that. But it was introduced last year as a means of introducing new positions on a 5-year basis. It involves forecasting. And what we do is we place new position requests in priority order based upon the mayor and the council's strategic goals and objectives and the city's growth and the CIP impact. And those positions are funded based upon financial forecast trends and available unreserved fund balances above target. And of course, the beauty of the plan is that we have the ability to make modifications from year to year based on the changing financial condition that we're confronted with. As everybody knows, the staffing and budget is complete for 2009, but the contingency planning is ongoing and somewhat constant in light of the environment we're in now. And if there's a thought that I could leave you with, this last slide just illustrates, again, the contingency planning method of preparing, planning, and prioritizing on a regular basis. The administration is continually monitoring the situation. We believe we've worked diligently to develop and plan and manage the budgets responsibly, including any of the personnel costs. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Councilor Costello.
Bill, you indicated on one of the slides that 80% of the city employees are covered under a labor contract. The other 20% are people who just elect not to either join a union or are part-time, don't qualify, or what would be?
That would involve the appointed officials, the mid-management group, the classified group, and between that's about everybody else. That accounts to about the other 20%.
Councilor Brown.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the presentation. Couple of questions. First of all, can you explain the difference between a step increase and a merit increase, or are they one and the same?
Well, the step increase would apply to basically 95% of the employees in terms of the 9-step plan. So step is movement through the pay scale. Merit pay is or merit or performance-based pay is for the appointed officials who don't have steps, but they have a range.
So just the appointed officials get
Right.
merit pay. Got
And
it.
I think sometimes the steps and merits can be used interchangeably depending on who you're talking with.
And how do you, in the budgeting process, determine how much money to set aside for those step increases? I see it looks like about half of the employees qualify for that 46%, which equals $1.2 million in the 2009 budget. How do you determine how many employees are going to qualify for that and budget accordingly?
Well, we have the ability to identify where people are within the step process, whether it's the first 5 years or the first 5 steps. And then basically you're looking at everybody else and guessing about half of them are going to be eligible for it and half aren't. We don't make any assumptions about somebody not getting it based on lack of performance. That doesn't make a lot of sense from a budgeting standpoint.
And are you able to tell, this year, for example, how many, we know that virtually everyone gets the 3%, but are you able to tell percentage-wise of employees how many get 1%, 2%, 3% up the scale?
I guess I'm not following your question.
In terms of the step increases, how many, their percentages of the raise, do we know how many employees, for example, are getting a 3% raise on top of the COLA? Do we know how many are getting a 4% raise on top of the COLA?
Well, as the slide indicated, it'll either be somewhere between the area of 3 and 5%, and using that last slide, I think there was a calculated number, it looked like approximately 515 employees, and I'd have to believe that that number's pretty close in any given year based on those numbers. And I'd say that the majority of those are at closer to 3%. To give you an example of what I mean by that, and I'm just kind of pulling something off the cuff, that maybe a custodial worker, for example, might have a 3% value to their step increases, whereas a police officer might have 5%.
And then, and I don't know if you can give a general number or not, but what is the benefits package worth to a city employee?
There again, that's going to vary depending on the employee group and how you're looking at it in terms of either a percentage of the budget or a percentage of the salary. We did do some calculations based on all city employees, and if I remember it correctly, the value of the benefits on a budget basis was around 29%. I can follow up if you'd like more information on that, Councilor.
Thanks, Bill.
Is that it, Councilor Brown?
Yes.
Very good. Councilor Staggers.
Yes. Bill, how many appointed officials do we have?
Boy, I don't have a number right off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Is it 13, 15? I mean, just roughly.
Somewhere in that neighborhood, yes.
Okay. Have we ever made a comparison of the salaries they receive with other cities? The reason I'm mentioning this is because I've heard comments that some of the department heads are paid extraordinarily well. Have we ever made a comparison with other cities?
Well, that's been looked at through various means. I'll have to check if the 2000 study included any directors or not. And right off the top, I don't remember if we included any of the directors' positions. We probably wouldn't have because we were looking for benchmark positions in the current salary study that's going on. And
also, too, when it comes to the steps, how many this year in 2009, how many city employees are not going up to the step, their next step? In other words, it's been determined that they did not merit an additional step.
you mean like a performance-based pay consideration where they say,
Yes.
in light
right.
of your performance, you're not?
Because the first 5 years is kind of automatic.
Well, they're all based on two factors, time and grade and performance. And
Okay.
for the first 5 years, it's based on 12 months and satisfactory performance, and then 5 through 9, satisfactory performance in 24 months. So those are the two criteria.
So of those people that fall into the STEP program, how many did not receive a STEP, even though they were up for a STEP?
Yeah, I don't have a number, but I would tell you it's infrequent. There are not that many.
Okay.
And we're happy that that's the case. We hope that there's not that many, but yes, we have our share that do not sometimes earn their merit increase.
So generally, everybody gets the STEP, basically.
It's out, yes,
Yes.
just about everybody gets it.
And then also, too, from time to time, I hear complaints from citizens that city employees are paid much better than private sector employees here in Sioux Falls. Is that true or not?
I guess that comes down to a perception. Depending on what your vantage point is, I'm sure you could make that accusation. We'd like to believe that we pay employees a competitive wage with good benefits, and our philosophy is to try to be at or slightly above the median of our peers in doing that. And for some, I suppose they might think that's paying too much, and others, they might say, well, it's not enough.
And then also the term COLA, cost of living allowance. How long has that been used here in city government?
Quite some time.
The reason I'm asking is because, to me, it just seems to be a fallacious term to use, because this is just a pay increase. It doesn't really have anything to do with cost of living allowance. Because, and the way to argue that is because in every contract we talk about COLAs. We're talking about COLA for next year, COLA next year. Well, we don't even know what the rise in cost of living is. It's simply a pay increase.
Well, it's to accomplish a couple of things. It's to keep that scale competitive in the market and to reflect, yes, increases in pay.
In other words, to me, it's more accurate to just simply call it a pay increase rather than a COLA. This has nothing really to do with cost of living. It's in a contract.
It's a fact. It's one of the factors. And what I would say when we look at COLAs in the bargaining process, we're looking at about 4 different factors. We're looking at external competitiveness. We're looking at internal equity. We're looking at employment statistics. And we're looking at budget considerations. So all of those factors go into that. But cost of living is a factor, but it's one of other factors as well.
Yeah. Yeah, once again, I don't want to belabor this, but it seems to me it's more accurate to simply call 3% pay increase for this year, 3% pay increase for next year.
Councilor Costello.
Bill, I would imagine that also factors in inflation somewhere in there as well.
It does, and part of our external competitiveness includes a review of what the CPIU is doing.
And then regarding the number of employees that get merit increases, I would assume that if somebody isn't getting a merit increase, then they're not performing satisfactorily. And then what happens then? Do we terminate them? Do they go on a probation period, or what happens? Because assuming that you would, over time, you would get rid of the people that aren't performing, and you're left with the people that are performing and therefore deserve a merit increase.
That's correct. Inefficient performance of duty is a just cause provision in the ordinance for disciplining an employee, and lack of performance can be a basis to terminate somebody, and that has occurred.
And you also indicated our current salary survey. When will that be?
The target completion date for that is the end of May.
And is that also going through the, I believe, was the Hay group that in 2000, will they be?
They have a copy of that.
Will they be doing this? Is that a similar study as what they
Right.
do? So they'll, not only will they be assessing the pay scales for various positions, I presume, but also the compression and the whole?
Right. They're looking at a number of factors.
Okay.
And yes, competitiveness, we've identified about 75, I think it is, positions that they're surveying, and we're right now in that data collection phase. And what we're going to have is at least 10 public sector jurisdictions that will have participated in that survey to give us some meaningful data about our pay practices and our salary administration program.
Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
More of a comment than a question, Bill, but in talking about comparing them to the private sector. In the city, there are many jobs that are essential services that there's no comparison to. Fire, people providing safe and secure water in the city. So there's not a comparison in the marketplace, correct?
There may not be, and that's why we traditionally are looking at other public sector employers. And if we have a position that is so unique to us, we're probably going out and looking and trying to find some information ourselves if we can get it. If not, we're using our internal classification system to value that position and place it on a salary grade that's commensurate with our pay system. And that works. And we do believe we're going to get some external data as well for some positions that may have crossover in, for example, IT. Public sector obviously has IT needs, as does the private sector. And the Siegel Company has access to database information that they can share that kind of information with us as well.
Councilor Knudsen.
Director O'Toole, just an average in the last few years, what would you say that turnover has been at the city for total employees?
I'm going to estimate this maybe around 4%.
Okay.
It's low.
Well, and on the other hand, I guess it's probably your advantage as being low because we don't have to spend as much time and money training new employees. But
Well, and obviously, in this environment, we think the turnover rate's even going to be lower.
Anybody else? Very good. Now, Bill, I'd like to get on my soapbox a little bit here. When the economy's good, a lot of people don't even look at working for a municipality or state government or something like that because it's just not sexy enough and the money's not good enough. But now when tough times come around, we start looking at folks who have paid the dues and are in a secure position, and I will add this too, that as if the economy heads in the direction that it keeps going, that might not be true either, that the security afforded by a city or municipal job may be jeopardized. It was in January, 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, I went to get the Sunday paper, and there were some flashing yellow lights. I went to check it out, and it's a broken water main. It was just bitterly cold out, and there are some Sioux Falls utility workers out there fixing this thing, slopping around the mud and the icy water while everybody in this room is probably home in bed. It takes a special breed of cat to want to do that as well. Since I've come on here to the city council and have run across a lot of the employees and been able to get to know them a little bit better and watch what they do, I have to say that I'm pretty impressed by the level of employee that the city has, especially in the director's thing. And every Monday night when I come down here, I know there's 4 people that are in this room on a consistent basis that could have retired, didn't need to be here, don't need to be here, they don't need the money, but they are here because of something in their heart tells them they want to work for the municipality and do the right thing. Now, Kermit, I know you're over there laughing, but it's the truth.
No, I'm not laughing, Bob, but I understand why you're saying that, too.
I'm saying
I know why
it
you're
because
saying
it's something
it.
that I believe
I
in,
know
okay?
I know why you're saying it.
We also need to attract top-flight people in the city of Sioux Falls. I don't want somebody with limited abilities working on things while I'm paying for them, because I do that enough in the private sector. So when I find out there's over 1,000 guys applying for a fireman's job in the city of Sioux Falls, and there's a waiting list for people that are applying to get a job in Sioux Falls, to me that's a good thing. It's the market working in reverse to get this city the finest employees that it can have. So I'm down off the soapbox now. Anybody else have anything? Ms. Knudsen.
Well, just a final thought, and it's not a question, is that I recently had a rather long conversation with one of our community leaders who had just some concerns at the city level, and but when I'd say I think it's what I just want to stress is that I have full confidence in our contingency planning. I mean, that it's not like we are just adding employees for next year. I mean, we have there's a plan that's been in place, and we won't hire people if we can't afford to. That I have full confidence in our contingency planning. And when I said to this person whom I respect a great deal, I said, well, do you realize this, and do you realize that, and do you realize that the administration put $5.1 million back into the reserve fund at the end of the year? The answer was no. And I said, well, all those employees you're talking about, we haven't hired all those employees. I mean, we're behind we've been behind for several years in police, and we need, as our city continues to grow, we need to have adequate police. And anyway, I just think it's important for people in the community to realize that we are on top of our game. We are doing incredible contingency planning, and we are sensitive to these difficult economic times for all of our citizens.
Councilor Brown.
And with that, I would just wrap up the conversation. Bill, that's why I wanted you here today. I think every organization, private or otherwise, is analyzing where they're at with their personnel matters right now in this economy, and I think it's important that we do this because as a council, we don't do this often enough. We only do it during budgeting times. So I think that your presentation really helps us answer the community's questions about what's going on with the city in terms of personnel. So I appreciate the information, and thank you for being so comprehensive with it.
Councilor Costello.
Just have one more question, Bill. The number of employees in the enterprise funds, do you have any rough idea on how many that might be?
I don't offhand. I'll get it to you, though. The total number of employees?
Yeah, and the only reason I asked that is because it was only a year ago or so that we went through the rate analysis study. And one of the auxiliary ways that we could look at from a city is whether or not we're getting our best bang for the money that we're investing, is to look at what we have to charge for cost of service. And by and large, I believe all of those studies indicated that in comparison to a number of different communities out there, we had a very low cost of service. And while we may benefit from some geographical benefit in some areas and we may have a disadvantage in other areas, but when you look at the broad spectrum of the communities we compared ourselves to, by and large, we were pretty favorably served by a lower cost. And if we had a runaway personnel cost, we would not be able to achieve that lower cost of service. So I think there's some correlation. I mean, there's some anecdotal information out there that shows us that we are, in some regards, at least close to the mark or where we should be.
Councilor Brown.
And along with that, one of the reasons I wanted us to have this discussion today is because I've had so many questions from constituents over the last few weeks. And the thing that I always remind citizens is, while many businesses in the private sector are not growing right now, we as a city are still growing and adding people every day to this community, and that requires continued growth in the services that we offered, and that takes staffing power. So, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Bill? Comments? Very good. Bill, thank you for coming down here today. Appreciate your input. Okay, that is the end of the presentations. Do we have anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, I'd like to remind everybody that we have a Public Services Committee right after this, and we're going to take up two topics. One will be the Ethics Committee revisions and or the Ethics Board revisions, excuse me, and the code enforcement issues that we've been talking about lately. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
I don't think we need a motion.
Don't need a motion? Okay, we stand adjourned.
Just leave.